Okay, Brendan. Thank you. Welcome. I'd like to welcome Dr. Brendan O'Keefe.
Right.
Thank you.
Mayor, members of the Council, members of the Executive Team, members of the press, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thanks for the leadership you're showing in your support for local and community development. The key word that's up on the screen there in front of you is vibrancy, and the word vibrancy has come up in your discussions around Mike's document as well. And it's fitting, even if it is somewhat daunting, to be following such a very comprehensive presentation by Mike, because Mike talked about the economic, the social, the environmental, how everything fits together. And that's something that comes through in this document, this report on rural vibrancy. So adopting this report, you're adopting something that provides the evidence base, that provides further impetus towards the implementation and the delivery of your own local economic and community development plan. So I think the two things go very much hand in hand together. So it's very much a pleasure and an honour for me to be asked to make this presentation to yourselves. What I'm going to cover in the presentation, first of all, a very quick definition of what we mean by rural vibrancy, because it's not just a local or rural thing, it also affects the towns and the villages. I'll talk a little bit very briefly about the methodology, and then get into the meat, which is the presentation of the results, and obviously conclude then with the series of recommendations. I have a quotation there from the outgoing Minister for Rural Affairs, Anne Phelan. Now, the Minister herself may be gone, but the fact remains that rural vibrancy is not just a parish pump issue, it's not just a Kerry issue, it is a national issue. And in the talks now about a Ministry for Rural Affairs and so on, it's important to recognise the regional development agenda. Regional development is good for Kerry, it's good for Ireland. It's not sustainable that we continue to have 1/3 of the population living in a single county. When you consider that, across the European Union, the average of the population that lives in the capital city region is about 15%. We're far more urbanised in Ireland than we often recognise, and we've put all our eggs in the Dublin basket, and that's not very sustainable. We do need to look at the potential and the importance of the regions, and Kerry is to the fore there. Kerry is also to the fore in terms of bottom-up approaches to rural and regional development. And our literature review, our scoping out of the issues here, recognises the importance, and we've heard it from the contributions here already this morning, of local and community and voluntary organisations and the differences they're making in promoting rural vibrancy and contributing to regional development. And I'm quoting there the Examiner editorial from last August, recognising that things are serious in rural Ireland, and we've heard that here already, but were it not for the bottom-up initiatives and some of the initiatives that you as a council are supporting, things would be certainly a lot worse. And they, in the Examiner, have specifically mentioned the LEADER programme, and that's something that comes up in the findings here in relation to South Kerry. So having looked at the literature nationally and internationally and what is rural vibrancy, we can see, and we see this in Mike's report as well, yes, it's about the economy, it's about jobs, it's about job creation. But to get private sector investment, you need to begin with public services. Private capital always follows public capital. That's a fundamental rule of economics. And having public services, an adequate public service provision in areas is key. Emphasising the quality of life, and in Kerry we have a high quality of life, and much of that is associated with environmental integrity. And you've talked about the clean-up there. All of that is relevant. Having inclusive and vibrant communities, a strong and coherent civil society. By civil society we mean community and voluntary groups that are highly organised, that are professional, that are delivering local development, and then that you have good local governance, that people, yes, vote every 4 or 5 years, depending on when there are local and regional and national elections and so on, but that they're also active in decision-making in their communities and feel part of their local communities. So that's the context, that's what we mean by rural vibrancy. How we went about collecting the data is what I'm going to look at next. And this was done as part of an Interreg project that involved 14 partners right across northwest rural Europe. So we were working with people from Wales, from England, from France, from Germany, from the Netherlands, from Belgium. And it was amazing the similarities in our experiences and theirs, and some of the synergies as well around solutions. Specifically then in South Kerry, we did a survey of 104 community and voluntary organisations. We did a mapping of public service provision and a very significant and scoping survey among almost 1,000 people. So by endorsing or adopting this report, you're not adopting just a report from Brendan O'Keefe from the University of Limerick. You're adopting a report in which civil society and citizens in South Kerry have had a say. This is on a scale larger than the various opinion polls and so on that are published in the media from time to time. So I've just got a listing there of the international partners and the policy and advisory panel of this transnational partnership, of which I was a member, has already approved the South Kerry work, and indeed there are parallel projects now being rolled out right across the other members. So in terms of the results, I've broken this into 3 areas. First of all, we look at civil society, then we look at the public service provision, and then we look at that series of that opinion poll, that major survey we did on how people perceive the vibrancy levels in their own communities. Now, the first graph here looks at the membership of community and voluntary organisations. And these are the community and voluntary organisations that are affiliated to the Kerry Community and Voluntary Forum, of which in South Kerry there are 253. And you can see over time there's an increase in the membership from their base in 1990 up to where they are today. And one councillor here has already referred to the exhibition that was on at the weekend and how people were so surprised to see the vibrancy and the levels of activity. And we can see the statistics on that screen there to show the evidence to back up what you're saying. Just by way of an aside here, I've excluded the GA organisations because their definition of membership is slightly different in that, to be on the under-8s or under-10 team, you have to be a member of the GA. So as to be more accurate here in our data, you can see we've excluded those, but the trend stands nevertheless. And then when you look at the groups and what they're doing, and you look at things like childcare, elder care, after schools, the homework clubs, the tidy towns, the environmental organisations, community and voluntary organisations across Kerry and South Kerry in particular are providing very important local and public services. In many ways, they're filling a void, but they're filling a void because the state is withdrawing from many communities, both urban and rural. And you can see on the slide in front of you here, there's a high level of what you might call professionalism in the community and voluntary sector. They have visions, they have access to the support services of South Kerry Development Partnership, constitutions, articles of association, strategic plans, recruitment mechanisms. The things that you might associate with the private sector, with efficiency and so on, are also prevalent in the community and voluntary sector. And it's important to recognise that and to support that. And I was very glad to hear, in Mike's presentation about the investment in community leadership and continuing to strengthen what you're seeing up on the screen in front of you there. And the reason, one of the reasons why community and voluntary groups are professional and so on, is because of the support they're getting through Leader and so on from the local development partnerships. And when we survey the groups and ask them, what has been the impact of SKDP, South Kerry Development Partnership, on your group and on your locality, you can see a very overwhelming support for what the partnership is doing. And it's interesting that Kerry County Council has also rowed in behind this and is supportive of local development and has taken a very pragmatic approach. Even when maybe Dublin was focused on centralisation, Kerry County Council remained steadfast in its support for local development and for the bottom-up approach. And indeed, that's in line with the perceptions of local communities. Then when we asked communities to describe themselves, we asked just a very open question, just give us 3 words to describe your community. And you can see the answers up on the screen in front of you. And the size of those words is in proportion to the frequency with which they come up in the survey. So there's a lot of positivity. Yes, there's an acknowledgement of the challenges and the issues and the difficulties, but overall there's an optimism. When you think of things like vibrancy and friendliness and so on, there's a focus on the people, on the social values associated with communities. So that's a very important foundation stone for us to build on, particularly in the implementation of your own local and community development plan. And then we asked communities, what are the main issues facing yourselves? And job creation, unemployment, the economic issues very much come to the fore. Youth, the exclusion of youth, the migration of youth, and that is associated then with the lack of employment. And the other word that's over there on the left of the screen is that word lack. and that's lack of facilities, lack of services, lack of jobs. There's a whole vacuum there to be filled because of the state declining and the state becoming more focused on the Greater Dublin area and withdrawing from the regions. And there's a job for local authorities to do, certainly in filling those services and in bringing the message to central government. And then we've seen how communities perceive themselves, we see what the issues are, but communities aren't resting on their laurels. They're doing something about it. And these are the issues they're working on. And you can see from the screen in front of you, they're mainly focused on the social issues. So there are also some work on environmental issues, but they're finding it challenging to deal with the economic issues. So that's where the likes of the County Council and the partnerships and so on need to be proactive and maybe more active in supporting economic development. So it's all very well to talk about the social at the local level, and then the economic as well needs to go hand in glove with that. And then in terms of economic development and in terms of greater support for the social and the environmental, we have a template. And the template is in the National Spatial Strategy. Now, I know this is being revised because we're promised a new national planning framework, and Mike mentioned that. There's a lot of talk at the moment about rural proofing and a new Ministry for Rural Affairs having a responsibility for rural proofing. Well, the first thing that ministry could do is go back to page 113 of the National Spatial Strategy, which I know is difficult to see up in front of you there. But in that model, you have a list very, very specifically of the services that should be available in county towns, in the smaller towns, in the villages, in the rural communities. Right from it's there in black and white, and this is government policy. We've had different parties in government and so on. It says there about the primary care centres, the primary schools, the childcare, the Garda stations, the shops, the pubs, the post offices. They're all there in black and white, and these are national issues. These are the foundation stones for regional development. So rural proofing can be taken back to the delivery and the implementation of the commitments to service provisions that are in the National Spatial Strategy. So when we take those and we look at where they are in South Kerry, and everything on this slide should be over at 100%. If we're true to the National Spatial Strategy, which was, remember, was formulated in 2002, well then we should be at the 100% at least 14 years on, but you can see we're not. We are better in terms of community facilities, the fields, community alerts, post offices, glad to say, is still up there, the hall, etc., and many halls have benefited from the investment of SKDP and so on. But when it comes to some of the statutory services, you can see you're below the 60, below the 50, below the 40%. So there's a deficit there that certainly needs to be addressed in terms of the service provision. This is to small towns and villages. And then if you look across the bottom of the slide here, you'll see I'm listing the names of all of the towns and villages. And they should all be up at 100% because they're all specified in the National Spatial Strategy. So Killarney, yes, has 100% of the service level provision, notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't have an A&E. Kenmare, Carsavie and Killorglin is slightly less than that. And then you can see the other towns and villages right over across to the right-hand side of the screen. And then in the red or pink colour there, you can see the smaller settlements, because the spatial strategy recognises that those smaller settlements can't have the full suite of services that you would expect to find in a large town or village. So they're in a different tier. But again, there are some deficits that need to be filled in there in this respect. This is rural proofing. This is why you need to recognise that Kerry can't be treated as a monolith, as if it were all the same. There are differences within the county and within South Kerry even alone, and we need to recognise those and tailor the interventions to suit the needs and so on of each local community. The bar on the right-hand side there is at 75%. 75% is the average level of public service provision across South Kerry, based on that 2002 baseline survey. And then when we look at community and the provision of community infrastructure and facilities in South Kerry, you can see, again, we should be at the 100% if we were in the optimum scenario. We have parents' associations, voluntary groups have engaged with the state, older people's groups, women's groups, etc. So there's a lot happening down there. And then at the other end of the spectrum then, you can see things like estate management, village renewal, community enterprise. And they're some of the areas in which the County Council in particular can row in behind and help local communities so that we get to the 100% on everything that's up on the list there. It is feasible, it is doable, and it's important, and certainly the plan that Mike presented to you moves us in that direction, and that's again to be welcomed. And then looking at each of the communities again, I don't need to dwell on this slide, but some communities are much stronger than others in terms of their social vibrancy. And it's interesting that some of the small communities, which were weak in terms of the public services, are filling the void themselves and have this, what we might call the little red hen philosophy. We're doing it ourselves. And that's certainly to be lauded and to be supported. So we've seen what we mean by rural vibrancy. We've looked at the public service provision, and now we need to look at, this is the last part of it, in terms of the results, how people, the general citizens of South Kerry, perceive the vibrancy in their areas. I said it, but there were about 1,000 people. It's 972 questionnaires were fully completed. The profile of those is representative of the population, and then we stratified it by geography, and we asked a series of questions about the economic, the socio-cultural and the environmental. So it's very, very comprehensive. Then, beginning with the social, if you like, the membership of community and voluntary organisations, about 43% actually of people are a member of one or other community voluntary organisation. You can see in Ivra, which is the most rural part of South Kerry, the rate is higher. In Killarney it's lower, and that brings up issues as well about some of the foreign nationals, some of the newer communities who've come to live in Killarney are less likely to be in community and voluntary groups. So yes, there are particular needs in the rural around services, but there are also needs in the urban areas around exclusion and the reaching out to new communities, and people have already mentioned the need for more emphasis here on social inclusion. Why is this important? Why is community and voluntary, what we call participative democracy, why is it important? It's important because it relates to representative democracy. People who are active as volunteers in their communities are also more active as citizens. The people who are out picking up the papers at the weekend, on Saturday and so on, they're the people who are more likely to vote. And we see that when we look at it with the data here. People, and if you look at the graph there, it's people who are aged 51 to 65, according to the blue, are most likely to contribute hours to their community in a voluntary capacity. And if you look at the red line, you can see it peaks. Out of the last 5 plebiscites between referenda and elections and so on, they also have the highest frequency in terms of voting. So community development, participative democracy, as it's called in the jargon, is good for representative democracy. It's good for Kerry County Council, it's good for Dáil and so on. So investing in communities, you're not just investing in infrastructure and services, you're investing in democracy, and that is hugely important, and that's why this data set is important. Looking at the economic vibrancy then, specifically of communities, everywhere you see green here, it's a positive. Everywhere you see red, it's a challenge. There's a series of indicators or statements on the left-hand side of the screen. I don't know how clear it is for you to read those, but the first one here is looking at local businesses appreciating local custom. And I heard this debate already this morning about the loyalty card. And that's important, and local people supporting local businesses. You can see a high level of agreement with that, high level of affirmation about having a good standard of living, and that's an attractiveness that Kerry has in terms of attracting investment. So people are supportive of local business, are positive in their perceptions of local businesses and what local businesses are doing, but then they're less laudable, they're less positive about some of the public services, particularly about things like public transport. So there are some deficits there. Again, back to the need for public sector investment to stimulate the private sector. So we have a roadmap coming from that slide, not just in terms of how people perceive their communities at the moment, but where the gaps are in terms of attracting investment by way of public services into communities. And I'm just looking there specifically at 2 of the indicators. The top one there is most people in this community have decent jobs. Now when it comes to Killarney, you can see that 60% of people either agree or strongly agree with that. But when you look at Ivra, you can see it's the reverse. 60% of people disagree or strongly disagree with that. Again, emphasising emphasising the fact that you do need to differentiate, and you do need to target some of the localities, and particularly the Gaeltacht part of Ivra is particularly weak and certainly would merit from investment. Then when you look at the bottom one then, public services, you can see more support or higher levels of agreement with that statement in Killarney, whereas in Ivra and Kenmare there are more frustrations around access to public services. So, you know, bringing services into a town, yes, is all very well and good, but there is a need for the rural proofing of public service provision, and that's very clear in the message that we're getting from people at local level. And when we take all of those, there were 21 indicators of economic vibrancy, which I'm not going to go through, you'll be glad to know. But when we put them on a score between 0 and 5, and we score each community, you can see on the left-hand side there, it's the communities that are closer to Killarney that score highest, and it's the more peripheral Ivra communities that score lowest. Again, emphasising the importance of the rural proofing and targeting and supporting particular communities. So that's the economic. In terms of the social, there's a lot more green, you know, in terms of the colours I was using in my slides originally there. You know, there's higher levels of agreement with the levels of social vibrancy that are in South Kerry. You can see the friendliness of the people, the festivals, a sense of belonging, sports and recreation, meeting facilities and so on. Now, a lot of that has happened because of the investment by the LEADER programme over recent years. But all those statements, in excess of 75% of people either agree or strongly agree with the presence of those social indicators, that social fabric in their communities, and that's hugely important. Then the third dimension and final one that we looked at was the the environmental, and this has come up here. And of course, you know, 20,000 people in Kerry make their living on scenery. You know, the landscape, the environment is important. And you can see some affirmation here of the work the County Council is doing. You know, most people, 70%, agree with that there are adequate recycling facilities locally, and that's testament to what you're doing. That for local people, the environment is a priority. There's you know, an acknowledgement that farmers are doing their best, but there are issues then around, you know, building control and planning and development. You know, almost evenly split among the population as to whether planning and development are carried out in a sustainable way. And I think there might be a message and something we could explore maybe with your planning department, you know, as we tease out some of the results there. So there's an awful lot of data, and I know most of you have had a chance to read the report since it was launched in November and circulated among the membership here. But when we put it all together and we look at the three dimensions of sustainability, in blue you have the economic, in yellow you have the social, and then in green, of course, you have the environmental. And you can see across South Kerry, in the Kenmare area, for example, you have the Killarney, Ivra and Mid-Kerry. You can see the highest, right across the board, is the socio-cultural vibrancy, followed by the environmental. The economic is lagging behind, and it lags behind more so in the more peripheral parts of the county. So you can see where the greatest need is in terms of investment. Because ultimately, if you look at the United Nations, Agenda 21 and so on, they talk about a balance, an equilibrium between the economic, the social and the environmental. And that's the target we need to set ourselves in Kerry. So when we come back to review this in a few years' time, all those bars should be the same height, and ideally they should be all up at the 5. And then we canvassed views for, you know, on local development, because clearly there was a whole debate happening while we were doing the survey work around alignment and the alignment of local government and local development. And so this is interesting because you go outside of the people who are members of community and voluntary organisations, you go to the wider citizens, and look, you know, up to scores of 10 there is agreement, 0 is disagreement. And you can see a high level of support among the citizens for the local development partnerships, for community development, and for the work that they're doing. And indeed the council, Kerry County Council, was one of the first councils in Ireland to pass a motion in support of and in recognition of the work that's being done by the local development sector. And you can see from the last two statements there, much less support for what was originally in the Putting People First document. And I think Kerry County Council was ahead of central government in recognising the more sustainable way forward there. So, putting it together, we see there's a certain degree of vibrancy right across Kerry, and we can see yourselves and the partnership and so on are ingredients that are enablers in making that vibrancy happen. but we see the socio-cultural is higher than the economic. The economic vibrancy is higher in the more populous areas, and the socio-cultural vibrancy is associated with rurality, with local leadership. And investing in leadership is important, and the contribution of the LEADER programme and the partnership to supporting communities there certainly needs to be acknowledged and needs to be safeguarded in the future. So the last slide has a set of recommendations there, and they're contained in the report from page 90 onwards. And I suppose there's a first recommendation is a very global one. It's maybe a national one, where we recognise civil society, where we recognise community and voluntary as a key component, a key pillar of our democracy. Our constitution recognises the presidency, it recognises parliament, it recognises the judiciary. It now, thankfully, since 1999, recognises local government. It should also recognise civil society, as it does in other European countries, is as an estate, as a pillar of democracy. And we have some of the data there to show that. Then civil society itself needs to continue what it's doing, but it needs to broaden its participation, particularly from the youth and from those who are new citizens to Kerry. We need to recognise, and I'm quoting the OECD there, one of their reports is, all places have potential, and that's important. It's not about the critical mass and adding to that critical mass all the time. It's about all places having potential. The OECD study of rural and urban and intermediate regions right across 35 member countries shows that with public investment, rural regions outperform urban regions in the long term, but they need to get the investment. How do you go about that investment? One of the ways you do it is through the social economy and supporting community business. We've already seen from the results, community groups are providing social services. They can also create jobs. We need to support them in doing that. You've already put your shoulder to the wheel in terms of the next recommendation, maintaining the autonomy and the integrity of LEADER and the partnership approach. Enforcing then, this is the rural proofing, the minimum targets for public service provision in line with the National Spatial Strategy, and ensuring and lobbying that those targets and that transparency then is included in the forthcoming National Planning Framework, which again ties in with the rural proofing of both the policy and then finally and importantly the implementation or the practice. Garbil Magat.
Thank you very much, Brendan. There are 6 councillors indicating. Councillor Johnny Healy-Ray, Councillor Michael Cahill, and Councillor Michael O'Shea, in that order.
I want to welcome Dr. Brendan O'Keefe and Noel Spillane and his colleagues to the meeting. I suppose for a councillor in South and West Kerry, there's an awful lot to chew on from our presentation, and I must say, Brendan, that I like listening to. I think you have an almighty grasp of our area, as the study proves, and of our county and of our country, and of what we need to do to progress further. I suppose what is to be admired for the people maybe in Ivara and West Kerry, in that with far less economic bars or whatever way it's measured, they're doing just as good every other way apart from the economic factor, so they have to be admired in that. I suppose there's something in that for our community support fund. We are getting less, and the councillors in that area now feel that we should be given equal treatment. I suppose in an area that's so peripheral like that, we have trouble, like I said earlier, with mobile phone coverage, broadband, access, our roads, employment. I suppose in places such as Portmagee and Valencia and places like that, that is as far as you can go, the amount of young people that have left there with the last number of years, for me as someone that's knocking around there an awful lot, that's the most disappointing thing to see. I suppose people who are isolated, older age groups, like if we see one of the slides there, or one of the things that said about people being isolated, like out of all the problems we have, health problems and everything, it is very sad to think that there'd be someone in a house or somewhere tonight who'd feel isolated in this day and age, with the amount of groups that you've shown there, the amount of activities with the internet and everything. It is sad to think there's people still, that way, and that's very wrong. A lot of that is people aren't even allowed to have a drink now, and we've been through all that before. Things like that, and they're all small gaps maybe, but all together now, they're hurting our rural communities a lot. I suppose the key to any one of these areas are and you've described there how we feel we're top heavy in Dublin, or this study shows we are. The unfortunate thing is that I won't say jobs cure everything, but they most certainly help. And when you have people working and when you have money turning, and it's easier, it is like being on one job that's cash tight and money, and being in another job where it isn't as easier work, where it isn't, you can get on better, you can do more. I suppose it is a pity over the years by governments that, I know Charlie McCreevy made a big announcement one time that never came to pass about decentralising departments or decentralising other things. He went maybe mad, I suppose is the word to put it. Phil Hogan went madder when he turned around the way our development companies were working. Them were set up, and I've said this here inside several times before, in 1990, not because everything was flying in places, whether it was South Kerry or North or East Kerry or Dido Holland. They were set up by voluntary people who felt a need that their community was doing around them, and they've done very good work. It has yet to be seen, and I know that management, and I know that the representatives and the LCDC are doing their very best. It is yet to be seen which model was better, and I hope this one is better, because that's what we have now. But I am worried that maybe the way that our development companies were working and were working from the bottom up may have been better, but I hope I'm wrong in that. I suppose, look, I don't want to delay the meeting. I want to thank you for all the voluntary work that you do yourself, Brendan. It is like the last report, I suppose, if we could work on certain things, and I would ask our manager, who is very new in her position, to take on, the things in my area anyway that affect us the worst, and so like access, broadband, mobile phone coverage. I can identify 10 of the worst areas. It's the farthest away when you come in at the county bounds into this county from any side. The areas that I represent are the farthest away point from that. We have trouble with things like ambulances. The Gaeltacht area was mentioned in the Iveragh Peninsula. That was one of the places where there was 2 Garda stations closed. Things like that happen under our nose, that happen by ministers that don't relate, don't understand, don't know where the Iveragh Peninsula is or West Kerry, don't realise what it is to live there, walk around with their head in the air. That's what's wrong. So it is mentioned there by Minister of Rural Affairs, whoever he or she may be, that is more badly wanted, so that these people may recognise and may know what it is to live and to get on and to work in these areas, because there's nothing for nothing in this world. We respect that, no more than we've anything against the people inside the Pale of Dublin. We most certainly have not, and they have their own issues. But we don't like something be at the expense of us, or we being neglected, while someone else gets something that they may not necessarily need as much. So that's all we can ask for, is our fair play. Thanks again.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Cahill.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I too would like to compliment Brendan on an excellent presentation. I'd like to welcome him obviously here today, and along with the officers from South Kerry Partnership. I think it's opportune in the sense that to have this presentation along with the prior presentation by Michael Scannell. They're directly related, and in every sense. And I spoke earlier about the dereliction of some of our towns and villages, and the need to bring life back into them. Brendan mentioned about the importance of proper infrastructure. I mean, we have bridges at the moment that are falling down. We spoke about Long Bridge the last day, and on numerous occasions, a lot of our older bridges are in trouble. They were built for a different time, a different era, a different purpose. And our national secondary routes, some stretches of them are in a shocking condition as well. And I cite the Cloughlin-Killarney Road and the Cloughlin-Tralee Road, for example.
Councillor, can I stop? Can we have a proposal? This has been standing on. Okay, continue.
Yeah, and Look, you know, we've seen the effects firsthand of immigration, and just to say, if one was to kind of glass it up somewhat, we're lucky we have good Kerry people in London and New York and different other countries and cities that have helped out with giving the start to our younger generations. But we also, on the other hand, have seen the result of immigration on our football clubs and indeed on our local communities. The life and soul has gone out of many of our towns and villages, and we certainly need to take action. And you know, as I keep saying, we need to help ourselves as regards the Leader programme. It's important that we get value for money. We've seen only too many small businesses going out of operation during the recession, and they're the life and soul and the breadline of South Kerry and indeed County Kerry. And you know, we must target our towns and villages and target the setting up of small businesses, as I've said earlier. And you know, we've seen in the past that, as regards help from the IDA, it's non-existent. They totally ignored us. And you know, there's been a mention of a Minister for Rural Affairs. I very much welcome this, and I spoke about it at an area meeting quite recently. And if the opportunity arises, and you know, to go into government, and if the offer of a Minister for Rural Affairs is on the table to Deputy Michael Healy-Rae in the interest of rural Ireland and indeed Kerry, he should accept it. You know, because it's important to us. We need help, and we're crying out for help. And you know, he's perceived as the champion of rural Ireland, and you know, there's one place to take action. If the opportunity arises, he should accept it. Thank you, Cahill.
Thank you, Councillor Shea. And following that, we have Councillor Dan McCarthy and Damien Quigg.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to welcome Dr. Brendan O'Keefe, the CEO of South Kerry Partnership, Noel Spillane, and his fellow officers here this afternoon, and to acknowledge the excellent work that they have done for Kerry to date and South Kerry to date, and may it long may it continue. Your document was very, what will I say, it was exciting to point, and it was very extremely informative, Dr. O'Keefe. But the theme is the same in terms of what Michael's presentation is to your own. And I think you put it all in a nutshell when you said quite clearly that everything that we are echoing about as councillors and at a Oireachtas level is therefore mentioned in page 113 of the National Spatial Strategy. So that is to protect the lifeline of our rural communities, like for instance the post offices, the small shops, the rural schools. That is the lifeline of our communities, and I think that we should demand, and I mean demand, that our Oireachtas members should enforce that across the state, and to make sure, which is very important, that you have an even spread of economic development in every county as well with that. And I think if that was enforced across the entire state, you wouldn't have the build-up of the East Coast that you have, of clogging up of industry, clogging up of motorways, building an extra runway in Dublin Airport, for instance, which is definitely that stuff in terms of economic growth and development. And I think definitely, if I had my way to nominate a Minister for Rural Affairs, I'd nominate yourself, Dr. O'Keefe, as Minister for Rural Affairs, because you speak what every rural councillor wants to hear, and you speak in that frame of that tone, whereby we can see that with that kind of expression and that kind of belief that the rural communities definitely can survive, and especially when you mentioned all places have potential, and that's crucial. All places have potential, and if you look at our national development plan over the years, where we've all these gateways and hubs, where we're sucking industry into the main towns and letting the peripheries die, I think that is crucial. All places have potential. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dan McCarthy.
Thank you, I'd like to welcome Dr. Brendan and South Kerry Partnership here today. I suppose South Kerry Partnership have done an awful lot of work throughout South Kerry, and looking at this report, I suppose there's still a lot more to be done. I suppose in the setting up of the different groups that they have done have worked, and I suppose one of those things that I be involved in myself is the Rural Men's Group, and the getting together of these in different events during the year and getting the people out of rural isolation. I suppose isolation in these parts of the country or county has been phenomenal for a number of years, and I suppose it has led to a lot of people being moved into the towns where, again, I suppose the lack of planning and the lack of infrastructure, I'd be putting the question forward, is there a room for the condition that rural shops and rural businesses like in these areas, that they be made exempt from rates for a few years to see could they be kept alive. I suppose it has come to the case that there's no person or no woman want to go into a rural area where there's no school or no shop or no barrack. It's again drawing the people towards the towns. I'd be for getting it easier to get planning in rural areas. I suppose we've gone back through the years where land have come up for sale, and where a neighbour mightn't have the price to buy it, it had been bought up by multinationals, forestry companies, and have taken over lots of the countryside where there was 13, 40 people living in roads and by roads. Now we're down to 1 or 2 bachelors, and I suppose maybe we're coming to a stage that maybe we would want to go back to maybe matchmaking again and getting a few women and trying to get these fellas matched up, and you know, it would maybe bring vibrancy back to rural Ireland. Thank you, Caroline.
Well done. Yeah, would you take on that role yourself? Yeah, you could become the second Dan Paddy Andy. Okay, Councillor Damien Quigg.
Thank you, Cahir. I want to welcome Dr. Brendan O'Keefe's report. We've been through this now at a couple of local community meetings in South Kerry, and there's some quite shocking and alarming stuff there, as I'm sure you'll all agree here. I suppose, as somebody who went to Brussels on a delegation about the Leader funding and had, I suppose, the opportunity to speak out there in relation to it, and meeting with Josephine Hoffman, the Director General of Agriculture and Rural Development, and I suppose she's head of the unit here to Ireland. They spoke about rural diversification, enterprise supports, and about a holistic approach to rural development, and about the continuation of these community-led models, and the models that were in Ireland here. She actually said that they had said that was the best placed model to be in the bottom-up approach. So I want to see, hopefully, a continuation of that under the new LCDC plan, where you would have the whole thing being community-led. Like the figures there around employment, it goes back to earlier this morning when we fed into the local economic community plan. That document is so important, and again, around the, I suppose, whole jobs and innovation, and we see enterprise there is out at the forefront there, and community facilities and various things around there. But we really need to look at getting the Minister down for enterprise, jobs and innovation. I don't know when the last Minister actually came here and had a serious meeting, but we do have to look at rural Ireland being a driver and not be concentrating on urban centres such as the capital county Dublin and they're out. And Dr. O'Keefe quite rightly mentioned in his report about the whole area around public transportation, and that is a big problem. So in terms of just getting to school, just the everyday needs for public transport, that type of thing, it's a huge problem around that. We don't have in this state a situation where you have a school bus service like where it actually operates from the Education Board and the Department of Education. It's all privatised out to companies and stuff, and the bus service, they do a small amount of it and stuff like that. But just areas around all of that need to be really looked at, and what we can provide. Another thing is school meals, and getting free school meals for every child across the state. so that no child is left hungry going to school. You know, we need to look at that element of it as well. But in general, I just want to welcome the report, and I hope that, you know, it will feed into where the local economic and community plan is coming from. And thanks very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Councillor. Now the following is Diane Nolan, Maura Healy-Rae, John Joe, Norma Moriarty and Niall Kelleher.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank Dr. Brendan O'Keefe for the presentation. The document is very impressive, but you really brought it to life in the parts that you have outlined here today. I suppose it's particularly to be commended that a group would take on a report like this outside of the vast range of local supports and services that they have to provide, to try and look at that bigger picture, because not every area obviously got to take part in this. I see that there was another group in Mayo, but this type of study, I think, should feed into the new National Spatial Strategy the same way that our LECP feeds into our County Development Plan. Those kind of hard supports and soft supports have to come together in the one document. And I think the previous National Spatial Strategy, Rural Ireland became the space between places, and that can't happen again. It was almost a void between the hubs, the gateways and the larger towns. The type of data that you've collected on those type of sense of place issues and social capital are particularly lacking in an awful lot of documents. I know that the census has even dropped for the last two census reports, those type of questions on social capital and volunteerism, which informed communities about other statistics other than just physical infrastructure and economy. And I would propose that this document be sent to the Southern Regional Assembly as they're starting their local or their regional studies into the new National Spatial Strategy, and that everybody who is taking part on this should look at this as a representative guide on the issues facing rural Ireland. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maura.
Thanks very much, Brendan, for a brilliant presentation, very thorough analysis. We all see the impact that rural development companies have in every town and village. They breathe some bit of life back into an area. Schemes have a dual effect, not only on the individual, but positively for the community as well. We see the community alert, youth clubs, festivals. These are the things we need to support, and I'd ask the Kerry County Council would continue in that regard, and that is the case with the Community Support Fund, but we need more funding like that, and like my good brother said, we need to distribute it more evenly across the county. As we know, people are so giving of their time when it's for their own community, but we need to support them further as well. There's a time when they're going to say, what is the point if we're not getting the backing, the funding from our local authority and the government, of course, as well. I have to commend South Kerry Development Partnership for the work they have done, and IRD Duhallow for the work they have done. There's no better people than these companies. They know what the local area needs, they know what the local area is lacking, what services need to be put in place and what initiatives need to be nurtured. So we need to continue supporting you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor John Joe Quality.
Thank you, and thanks again to Brendan for that very comprehensive and very fitting. I suppose it really ties up and the way the information was gained. It's very much obviously Kerry, and I suppose these things don't happen too often, and the standard and the number of people that were, you know, the study we came from was a big number of people, so it's very welcome from that point of view. I suppose just the leader, I suppose thing, I'm on the board of the IRD Duhallow, and I would, as has been said, the LCDCs, I'm sure they're doing the best they can, but my own view, and I think it came up there on the graph as well, people on the ground, people that are affected by these decisions would know best, in my view. They're the ones at the bottom, and it is supposed to be bottom up. Now, we are where we are, but it has to be still said, and I'm sure that the people at the top, I think in Europe, would have preferred, I think the model that was there originally would have, I think myself, would be more beneficial, and unfortunately now we're at a stage where the funding is not the funding is not going to make a huge difference, unfortunately, because it's been cut so much. But I would prefer if it had been left as it was. I mean, people who make the decisions, maybe they think that they're in our best interest, but I think that the people, as the graph says there, on the ground know best. And not to mess with my mother, on occasions we'd have to take medicine that we wouldn't particularly like, but you'd know the reason we would take it, and it was for the right reasons. This, unfortunately, I think we're being told is for the right reasons, but maybe the people think it is, but I think as time goes on, we'll find out more and more that it's not, and maybe we'll end up changing it or hopefully maybe going back to the model that it was, because the people that started these things off, started these groups off, were voluntary. They did it because there was nobody else supporting them, and they found themselves doing a huge amount of work. I don't think they would ever have envisaged the amount of oversight and unnecessary bureaucracy, in my book, that's gone on now. I think the groups that were there were doing the job that they were put to do. I think they were doing it well, and I think that they are the people that should be listened to, and I think the people on that graph there who feel, you know, that they're not happy with the way it was should have been listened to more. And for that alone, and for all the other information, I thank Dr. Brendan for the huge amount of work that's gone into this. It's there forever. It will have to be, I suppose, looked at again to see how things have changed. But I think it's a great model. It's a great something to be able to refer to, and for that I thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So now I hope some of that medicine that you were recommended wasn't Bruclax, but Councillor Norma Moriarty.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe, and indeed the partnership for your work in this document. I suppose just to continue on from the point that John was making there, one of the best ways to measure what the current situation will reward or reap is if we come back to these surveys maybe in a number of years' time and do a compare and contrast, because the figures will speak for themselves and we know whether or not we're on the right track or not, and it will be hoped that we will be on the right track. I suppose just a few general points. The idea that there is potential everywhere, I completely and utterly concur with. Currently, unfortunately, in this country, there seems to be an attempt to pit rural versus urban, and to suggest indeed that those of us who are screaming for rural development are in some way being parochial and self-serving. We're not. We're looking at what is good for the nation as a whole, and indeed for our county as a whole. And I think we need to be very, very strong in that argument, and to make no apologies whatsoever for looking for the services that we're looking for. The point that you made, or the comment that you made early at the beginning of your presentation, that private money will follow public money, is a basic economic fact. And we are in a position in this county, has been alluded to earlier, where we've had a lot of people who have ties to this county, who are from it, who have the capacity to invest in it, and that private money will follow public money if it's targeted and approached sensibly, and the will is there to do it. Equally, the figures showing that the voluntary commitment to each other's community or to our own communities underpins the fact that people they're just give them a hand up, or a hand out even, and they're there. The goodwill is there, the effort is there, the knowledge is there in many cases, and indeed very specific skill sets are there, provided they're given an opportunity to work with agencies and engage with agencies. I would also just like to make the point that within our own county, I think it is incumbent on us to look at our county in a whole also, and not to look at our electoral areas as individual little fiefdoms or whatever they might be, and where we see and there is recognised need that we look at the resources that we have, and they're too constrained, agreed, we could always do it more, but that those resources then are put where they are, where the need clearly states that they are. And that we don't just say, look, I have to look after my own patch and my own patch alone. We have to look at what is good for the entire county. And a vibrant rural community will help the larger town, it will help the larger urban centre. If one dies, it will not be long when the others will start to feel the effect. And so we have to make that case and work together in that regard. Thank you.
Just a couple of points from myself.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Look, I won't be too long. Dr. Brendan O'Keefe, thank you very much for a very detailed analysis of the research that was done. It certainly is very helpful for us in doing our roles as elected officials. And certainly I do hope that the presentation that you saw earlier from Michael gives us some heart in the fact that this authority and others are taking leading and understanding from the work that has been done in the past by the leader companies and the current situation that rural deprived communities are in at this current time, and that I'm heartened that the manager has said that it is not going to sit on shelves. Hopefully it's on a lot of desks and being used as a Bible in every desk that there possibly can be. The one I find interesting statistic there on one of your graphs, wherein quite aligned actually is the fact of that there isn't enough local politicians. I'm also taking that the same graph has the same figure for the amount of local Gardaí. Now, whatever about local politicians, there certainly isn't enough local Gardaí in our rural communities with the centralisation that has happened in Garda Síochána over the last number of years. Now, while I'm heartened as a result, hearing at our last JPC meeting from our Acting Chief and Superintendent that there are more Gardaí coming to Kerry, but I think it is most important that those Gardaí are put out and served in communities. So, that goes to the services that the state and the local authorities provide in these areas. So again, I don't want to be repetitive from some of my other colleagues. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you to South Kerry Partnership for being here today also. And we need to work together and make sure that the LECP plan is delivered over the next number of years.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Francis.
I'd just like to welcome Brendan and Noel Spillane and the other members of the South Kerry Development Partnership here today. I just want to acknowledge the great work that you do all over South Kerry. The towns and villages would be in a lot worse state only for the work that you are carrying out. I suppose a big problem we have in South Kerry is broadband, and it's something that we must continue to fight for. I'd just like to support Councillor Cahill there, and I think that we should be looking for a Minister for Rural Affairs, because a lot of the ministers above there don't realise what we are going through down here and what funding we need to keep going. Just with the Community Support Fund, I suppose, is disappointing, and as the councillor who proposed to vote down the budget last year, and we'll be doing the same next year if the funding isn't upped. So I just want to assure you that it's just a small bit disappointing that the funding isn't more equal. And just with the post offices, and I know that Councillor McCarthy had a motion at our municipal meeting last week, and it was that more services should be given to the post offices where you pay your road tax and stuff like that through the post offices. So I thought it was a good motion, and I just wanted to support that. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. You might also consider taking on the role of Councillor McCarthy's suggestion a while ago to become, that's very good. And just a couple of points myself, Brendan. Sorry, Councillor Norman Foley.
Like previous speakers, I want to thank you for your excellent presentation, and I want to just raise the point just has been raised by Councillor John Francis there in relation to the post office network. Now, I actually have a motion in relation to that, and in relation to this I'd like to move it at this point, given that I think there has been a determined effort to undermine the fabric of rural society, as we would call it, and on the strength of that, my motion asks that the government would desist from what I would believe is a constant onslaught against the post office network, and their request really for bank details from people and encouraging them to accept payments via electronic transfer rather than cheques, so that they cannot go into the local post office, is having a detrimental and will have a detrimental effect on the potential to survive of the post office network going forward. And I'd formally move the motion to ask central government to desist from taking negative action against the post office network and to take more proactive and positive action by supporting them, which will in turn support rural communities. Thank you.
That's seconded by Councillor Norma Moriarty. Yeah, and is that taken as moved then, Councillor Foley? Okay. Right, just a couple of quick points myself. The airport is mentioned. Well, airports are a business. I would encourage all of ourselves, for starters, and other people in Kerry to continue to use it. There's an excellent service out at Kerry Airport. And the beauty about it is when you get back, you're at home practically. In relation to the post offices, the people of Kerry, ourselves here, how many of us are actually paying the majority of our bills in our local post office? There was a case that I was told of recently where there was a campaign to keep a post office opened. There was 30, 40, 50 people. Apparently only 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 use it. So, if we don't support our post offices, then how will we expect somebody else to keep them open? The second point is jobs. Obviously, like many of you councillors said, there's loads of them in Dublin. If you are travelling north of Dublin, be gone out of the M50 before 7 o'clock because you're in a car park. Effectively, for the infrastructure in Dublin, there are too many jobs. Whereas if those jobs were shared, as indeed as Brendan and all of you have said, in more rural areas, one, they would be sustaining the rural area. A lot of the people that are in Dublin would prefer to be back there. And secondly, they would be able to get housing at a much cheaper price, so that their disposable income would be more. Too many jobs in Dublin, that's the problem. Finally, a couple of you mentioned this model, and it is an excellent model, as indeed the IT of Tralee have a fantastic model of providing facilities for disabled. In fact, so much so that this model, a Kerry model, is now getting an international award from President Obama. It's coming up in May, I think. So, we have a lot to be proud of. We can work together. But ask ourselves, all 33 of us, how many bills are we paying in our local post office? Okay, thank you, Brendan. Oh, sorry, CEO.
Just Dr. Brendan, just like to welcome you very much and to thank you, and also to Noel Spillane and so. Form the basis for the actions that fell out from that. So I think that's hugely important to say. I think it's I think we're all very acutely aware of the problems that we have and the difficulties that we have in right across the county, and as we're focusing in South Kerry along the Ivra Peninsula particularly. And there is no easy solution, and it's very difficult to find paths and solutions. And I think that's why it's so very, very important that that leader programme commences. I think it's hugely important that the LCDC works, that we make it work as best we can. That it's hugely important that we work together. And I think we're very, very fortunate, and I'm not just saying this because the people are in the room, but there has been full partnership and engagement between South Kerry Development Partnership and Kerry County Council, as we're talking about South Kerry in this particular case. So, we have and are working together on a number of projects. I think it's hugely important, as the leader funding comes on stream, that it's spent wisely, sensibly, that it falls out from the research that underpins it. I think it's hugely important, and I know there's a commitment here in this chamber that we use our community funding to co-fund a number of strategic priorities around the regions. And also, I think it's very important, such as the funding that has come out, we'll say, through the Rural Economic Development Zone funding, which we talked about earlier. I think more schemes like that will really, really help us to try things and trial things, because, as I say, there is no definite answer. If we had a long discussion here this morning, and there is no one way. Balanced economic growth is that's not putting all your eggs in any one basket, but we do know that as a county, that small, medium-sized enterprise is hugely important to our growth and development. We know that rural enterprise is hugely important if we're to sustain the populations in the areas that we saw that have the worst colourings there. So I suppose it's important to say, look, as a county council and as a local authority, we're fully in there and we're fully engaged. And I think, just as the new spatial strategy, or whatever name it will have, I think it's very, very important to me as well that I have this information going when we're talking and looking at policy development, and where lines can go on maps can be hugely important to what falls out for our county. So I want to thank you very much. I think it's a hugely significant day that we have this, and thank you.
Brendan, you want to reply or respond?
I want to acknowledge the contributions from the floor and from the top table, from the Mayor and from the CEO. To acknowledge as well the fact that, yes, this study was about South Kerry. We were asked, I'm in the university, in Mary Immaculate College, University of Limerick, we were asked to do this by South Kerry Partnership. But you can see from the contributions from the floor here how some of you from North Kerry and beyond were able to identify with what's happening in South Kerry as well. So we're very glad that this piece of work we've done is useful to the communities, is useful to the council, and the other work we did with Mike and his colleagues is feeding in then and has informed the local and community development plan. Because it's very important that when you make decisions as a council and when you go to lobby for Kerry, that you have an evidence base, that you have the facts and so on to back up what you're looking for. And if we in the universities can continue to do that, and I've heard the ITT mentioned here this morning as well, that's very much part of the public service role and the public service obligation that we play. And we're very happy to work with local authorities and with communities that are as open as yourselves and as strategic as yourselves, and we look forward to continuing that partnership with yourselves.
Very much, Brendan. And I suppose what you just said there, to have plans like this would be similar to somebody going to a bank looking for a loan. The first thing they'll say is, what's your financial plan? And if we're looking for help from Dublin or from Europe, we need to have a plan. So, excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Brendan. And it was, as the CEO said, so timely today with the others. Thank you. Now, obviously, people might like to have a sandwich in a bowl of